Tonight's topic is, are modern Gnostics elitist? Good evening, Bishop Peterson. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. This seems to be a subject that comes up pretty frequently, I would say.
Yeah, I hear about it. It's funny. I hear it from different quarters. I've read some evangelical Christians who have criticized Gnosticism as being so-called elitist. Apparently, being an evangelical Christian is itself supposed to be commonplace or ordinary, but Gnostics are bad people because they believe that they were over other people or elite. But I've also heard the critique being made of people, made by people within alternative spiritual movements by saying, well, somebody's calling themselves a Gnostic. Are they claiming to be spiritually superior to other people? And I think it's an interesting question, because it is something that we in our community will encounter periodically. We encounter people who think that they are spiritually above other people, and maintain that this is a perfectly acceptable way of thinking about themselves. So I think it's an interesting question.
As I do as well. I think we probably have to, though, kind of frame when we're looking at our modern Gnostics elitists, probably with a little bit of history and a little bit of, I guess, historical precedence there. I mean, many of the early church fathers kind of wrote, I think, on the idea of primitive Gnostics as being elitist.
Right.
You had the idea that Gnostics were in possession of a secret knowledge that they possessed. You have things that only those who were initiated as Gnostics basically were the true brethren, or the nomadics, and that they were kind of beyond that of those who weren't initiated into the secrets of the mysteries.
Yeah, you had the idea of the Hylics, who were completely bound into matter, and they're at the kind of the lowest rung, the ordinary people, and then you had the psychics who kind of were catching on a bit, but then you of course had this notion of the as you said, the nomadics, who were the people who were the spiritual elite, and of course you had things like that within later on with the Cathars, and they had different levels of commitment as well. So there is that historical precedent, but I think it's important to keep in mind that modern Gnostics are not always don't identify as Reconstructionists necessarily. So we haven't tried to necessarily imitate the structures of the ancient Gnostics, and there is a tendency, at least when you're operating in what's supposed to be a democracy, to a more egalitarian view of spirituality. But I think it does raise some issues for us when we talk about spiritual practice and the importance of spiritual practice and development. Is there anything that a modern Gnostic can aspire to spiritually? Are there levels of attainment that we can reach, and what would that look like?
That's an interesting question there. I think that in many cases we kind of get trapped at first. I mean, almost the trappings of the demiurge. We get trapped into kind of this material world where, even as beginning Gnostics, I think Buddhism, does kind of rear its ugly head to a certain degree. Yeah. Especially, I think, looking at the history of the modern Gnostic movements, where it came from. Many of these evolved out of some of the mystery traditions of the late 19th and early 20th century. Freemason schools, Martinism, Rosicrucian movements, etc. And so many of these, I thought groups already believed that they were in possession of secret knowledge that was only able to be passed on to other initiates. And as an initiate of many traditions myself, I do hold sacred that which I have been initiated in, and don't freely share that information with those who are considered quote-unquote profane. But that being said, the Gnostic experience, I don't think, is limited to those who have been initiated into certain mysteries. And it's not limited to just my particular brand of gnosis or apostolic gnosis. Gnosis is an experience.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that something that is important is that a lot of the mystery traditions, the organizations, the lodges, a lot of the so-called secret information is now available online. People shouldn't have put that stuff up there, but it's happened. But I think that we also know, those of us who have been involved in these movements and have actually practiced also know that you can put all the information you want online and people can read it until they've actually experienced it through work. It's not necessarily going to have much power. It's not necessarily going to have that much effect on the individual if that individual has not developed him or herself toward that level of attainment. And as you also note, there are many different ways for this to happen. There are traditions, my own tradition that I practice, Fourth Way, Gurdjieff's Fourth Way, is a lot of the work you do is in life. And there isn't necessarily a whole step of initiations within an organization, a secret organization. It's you work on yourself in life, and that you develop yourself through your ordinary day-to-day tasks, your responsibilities in your occupation, your responsibilities to your family. And there are a lot of people out there who may not even identify as Gnostic, but because they have chosen to consciously act within their professions or within their families, and they remain awake and conscious, may have a much higher level of development than people who call themselves Gnostic or who go around collecting funny hats.
I would have to agree with that.
Or who have downloaded a lot of information off the internet.
Yeah, and I think, again, the internet in many ways can be kind of that two-edged sword. Yeah. It's a valuable asset for many, but I think we start getting into that kind of armchair magician, armchair Gnostic, where they believe simply accumulating information is the same as gnosis, and it's not.
No,
it's far from it. Definitely far from it. Kind of maybe shifting gears a little bit. Do you think, though, that many of the modern Gnostics that kind of come off with this kind of elitist feel, do you think a lot of it has to do with either specific traditions, with particular lineages or rites, or do you sometimes feel it is just maybe kind of misinterpretation of those things by the individuals within these particular organizations?
I think that you've hit on something there in both cases. I think that there are so many Gnostic churches that are affiliated with various lodges or esoteric traditions where there's such things as grade advancement, for example. So that people are associated with these grades, and people become aware that there are some people in the church who have a higher grade than they do, or they become aware that they have a higher grade than the other people do, and that can be part of it. Although that may be more of a perception of elitism rather than the actual attitude. The people who actually may hold the higher grades may not actually have an attitude of superiority, but there may be an understanding. People may give more credit to grade advancement than the people who actually hold the grade actually do. So I think that that's a real possibility. I think that there's also the fact that many of our churches are organized such that they are clergy heavy. So the idea is, oh, well, you're a priest or you're a bishop, and if you're just a lowly congregant, people sometimes may have funny feelings about that and assume that people who have taken ordination, have taken holy orders, are somehow higher up. And I'm not sure that I would agree with that at all, given that some of the most enlightened people that I've encountered do not have holy orders, but do support local Gnostic parishes. So I think that there is that, and there has to be that. I think modern Gnostics should be mindful of that when we organize, that this is not about gaining hats or collars or degrees. Some of us may have certain skills and vocations and callings. That's one thing, but that does not necessarily represent spiritual attainment.
I would agree. One of the things that I really appreciate well with our brethren in the AJC is that they really aren't bishop heavy the way that I see a lot of other organizations. In this particular country, you've got one bishop kind of in charge of the whole entire show, and up in Canada, basically the same thing, and the same thing in Australia. But you don't seem to have a bishop for every state, or in many cases, you walk in and there's 4 bishops sitting into a room. I think. In a jurisdiction that I used to belong to, that you remember also, we were bishop heavy. Think about it. We had the Sovereign Triad, and then we had other members of the Supreme Council. At one point, we had, 5 bishops, all basically celebrating the liturgy.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said about groups kind of developing, a kind of smaller and kind of working to that idea of gnosis, and not necessarily kind of top heavy, where maybe some elitism, I think, can definitely go in, I think, kind of trickle down into a group. Again, I think sometimes we're on this kind of double-edged sword. You get many Gnostics who kind of believe that they are in possession of a secret knowledge, of an initiated knowledge that is sacred to them because it's been handed down from mentor to student for generations, and they want to make sure there's a continuity of that, and that information falls into the right hands. But I'm almost of the firm believer of that. It's like you try to teach someone how to cook. I can invite 15 people over and say, hey, let's all bake a chocolate cake, and I may even put all the ingredients out. It doesn't mean I'm going to have 15 delicious chocolate cakes. No. Maybe 2 people are going to get it right. So as far as elitism on that end, I'm usually more than willing to share most information very, very freely with people. But it's what now they do with it.
Yep.
On whether, do they really become Gnostics? So sometimes I cringe at the idea of Gnostic elitism, because as I've expressed it, our doors are open to anyone. Everyone is welcome.
Yeah, and I think also there is, one criticism that has been made of the so-called Gnostic scriptures is that they clearly were not meant for mass consumption, unlike the canonical scriptures, that these Gnostic scriptures clearly had specific meaning to people within specific communities. Although it's interesting to note that in the canonical Gospels, Jesus himself states that he speaks in parables so that people cannot understand him. And then he goes back and he tells his disciples the real meaning. So even within the canonical scriptures, we see this idea of not casting pearls before swine, the idea that there are some things that some people aren't going to get. The question, though, is, and I think that's what is important here, is that we not make any assumptions based on our prejudices as to who's going to get it. I think it's very easy for us to assume that just because somebody has a funny hat and several notches on it, that they are going to necessarily be the pneumatics. They're going to be people who are the most spiritual. And I think that is, in fact, not necessarily true at all. And that people with, in some cases, minimal formal education, people who haven't been initiated into multiple organizations but have done significant work on themselves, may have the most to teach us. So I guess I would give this maybe as a caution to our movement, is to not get so bound up in our titles and our organizations and our degrees that we miss real opportunities to learn from each other.
I think that's a really, really great point you brought up right there. is that we've got to be able to learn from everyone.
Yes.
If I just walk into a room and say, okay, well, there's a bishop, there's a bishop, there's a bishop. Okay, I'm going to go hang out with my little bishop clique because they're going to be the only ones I can hang out with. And, well, I may miss a great opportunity by not sitting down and breaking bread with the congregant who may just blow my mind.
Yeah, and there are plenty of them out there. There are plenty of these folks out there, and that's one of the blessings of being. I sound like an evangelical here, but it's one of the blessings of being part of an actual local community.
Right.
Is that you can really get your mind blown and learn a lot from the people who are part of the community, but may not have the fancy title. And in fact, my own experience has been that. Not to in any way diss my fellow bishops here, but some of us got our positions because we were good administrators.
Right.
We had certain leadership qualities, but that doesn't make us in any way more spiritually advanced.
And that's, an argument sometimes I have with students many times is that, students, may come to me and they may think that I have all the answers for them and say, I don't have all the answers for you. I'm no different than you are. I simply have been doing this a longer period of time. That's why I've got the funny hat, I've just been doing it longer. I don't have all the answers. Those answers you need to seek within yourself. And I think the people who realize that kind of from the beginning, and they realize that it's about doing the work and it's about letting the gnosis flow within. We can learn a great deal from them. And it's not just limited to those who have been initiated into our particular mysteries or into our particular flavor of Gnosticism.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think we're going to continue this conversation in our podcast.
Yes.
That we will be doing a little later. But how about a little bit of news before we end our video for today?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we want to thank people who have been supporting the show on Patreon. For those of you who have not been keeping up to date on this, you may notice that Talk Gnosis no longer has any ads on it. When you go to watch it, we're not going to bother you with ads anymore. Instead, we are using a system called Patreon, and you can visit this fundraising campaign of ours at Patreon, patreon.com/Gnostic, and you can actually help support the shows by pledging a small amount of money, as low as 50 cents per video or podcast that we produce each month. And you can set a cap on that, so you don't get charged more than you want to be. And you're going to have the opportunity to help us produce more content. Already, we've got these podcasts. We've got the Lost Word that we're doing right now, as well as Father Tony's own vlog that he's doing. So we're doing some great video and audio content, and your support really helps us out. And so if you are interested in helping out with that, go out and check the website. I think it's kind of a neat program. Also, we wanted to let everybody know that we are doing Talk Gnosis After Dark. This is an audio podcast that follows our shows, and you can check it out on a variety of podcast platforms, including, oh my goodness, iTunes. iTunes and Stitchers. Thank you very much, Father Tony. And do check out Father Tony's vlog on Gnostic NYC's channel on YouTube. He is addressing the issue of whether Gnostics were anti-intellectual or not. It's an absolutely great show.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm really glad to see Father Tony back in front of the camera again. So I really enjoyed it quite well. Again, we always appreciate the feedback of our viewers, both on YouTube comments as well as on our Facebook page. You can also email feedback or suggestions to talkgnosis@gnosticnyc.com. Coming up next week, I'm pretty excited about next week's show. We are being joined by His Grace, Mar Thomas, as we discuss the importance of critical thinking for Gnostics.
That's going to be a great show. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
I'm actually probably a little more excited about the podcast afterwards.
Oh yeah,
So,
that's going to be good. That's going to be good.
you know, I think the video, our YouTube show is going to be fantastic, but really, really going to be great kind of picking his brain for the next hour after our video show.
Absolutely. All right, well, as always, this has been a production of the Gnostic NYC Network. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends, click the like button, and subscribe to our channel. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the views of Gnostic NYC or any other organizations. No animals were harmed during the production of this show. For more Talk Gnosis, tune in every Wednesday for a new episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.